Book of Heaven, Volume 18, 21st to the 24th October 1925, page 22 to 28. October 21, 1925. Effects of one act in the divine will. The sorrow of Jesus is suspended in the divine will, waiting for the sinner. This morning, on coming, my sweet Jesus told me, "My daughter, I bring you the kiss of all heaven." And as he was saying this, he kissed me and added, "All of heaven is in my will, and because they are in this supreme volition, whatever I do, they feel the echo of my acts, and as though responding to my echo, they repeat what I do." Having said this, he disappeared. But after a few hours he came back, telling me, "My daughter, return to me the kiss I gave you, because all of heaven, my Mama, our celestial Father and the Divine Spirit, are awaiting the requital of your kiss, because, since an act of theirs has come out in my will toward the creature who lives in the exile, they yearn for the requital of it to be returned to them in my same will." So, as he drew his mouth close to mine, almost trembling, I gave him my kiss, which produced a harmonious sound, never before heard, which rose up high and diffused in everything and to everyone. And Jesus, with unspeakable love, added, "How beautiful are the acts in my will! Ah, you do not know the power, the greatness, the marvel of one act in my will. This act moves everything, heaven and earth, as if they were one single act, and all creation, the angels, the saints, give and receive the return of that act. Therefore, an act done in my will cannot be without return, otherwise all would feel the sorrow of a divine act which has moved everyone putting of his own into it, and yet, it is not requited. The operating of the soul in my will is like the silvery sound of a vibrant and shrill bell, which sounds so loudly as to call the attention of all, and it sounds and sounds again, so sweetly, that all recognize, at that sound, the operating of the soul in my will, all receiving the glory and the honor of a divine act." Having said this, he disappeared. Then, I was continuing the fusing of myself in the divine will, feeling sorrow for each offense which has ever been given to my Jesus, from the first to the last man who will come upon earth. And while feeling sorrow, I asked for forgiveness. But while I was doing this, I said to myself, "My Jesus, my love, it is not enough for me to feel sorrow and to ask for forgiveness, but I would like to annihilate any sin, so that you may never, never again be offended." And Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, "My daughter, I had a special sorrow for each sin, and upon my sorrow hung the pardon for the sinner. Now, this sorrow of mine is suspended in my will, waiting for the sinner when he offends me, so that, as he feels sorrow for having offended me, my sorrow may descend to feel sorrow together with his, and immediately grant him forgiveness. But, how many offend me and do not feel sorrow? So, my sorrow and forgiveness are suspended in my will, and as though isolated. Thank you, my daughter, for coming into my will to keep company with my sorrow and with my forgiveness. Please continue to go around in my will, and making my sorrow your own, cry out, for each offense, sorrow, forgiveness, so that I may not be the only one who feels sorrow and impetrates forgiveness, but I may have the company of the little daughter of my will, who feels sorrow together with me." October 24, 1925. The divine will is one single act, immense and eternal, which contains, altogether, creation, redemption and sanctification. One who lives in the divine will, possesses this single act and takes part in all its works, forming one single act with her God. As I was in my usual state, I felt my sweet Jesus move in my interior, in the act of laying himself within me, as if he were placing himself in agony. I could hear his rattle of agony, and I too felt I was agonizing together with him. Then, after I had suffered for a little while together with Jesus, he said to me, "My daughter, thinking about my passion, compassionating me in my pains, is very pleasing to me. I feel I am not alone in my pains, but I have with me the company of the creature, because of whom I suffer, and whom I love so much, and as I have her with me, my suffering becomes sweeter for me. How hard is isolation in suffering! When I see myself alone, I have no one to whom to entrust my pains, nor anyone to whom to give the fruit which my pains contain, and so I remain as though drowned with pains and love. Therefore, as my love can endure no more, I come to you, to suffer within you, and you with me, the pains of my passion, in act, in order to repeat what I did and suffered in my humanity. To repeat my passion in act in the creature is different from one who only thinks about and compassionates my pains. The first is an act of my life, which takes my place in order to repeat my pains, and I feel I am given back the effects and the value of a divine life. On the other hand, when one thinks about my pains and compassionates me, it is the mere company of the creature that I feel. But do you know in whom I can repeat the pains of my passion in act? In one who has my will as center of life. My will alone is one single act which has no succession of acts. This single act is as though fixed to one point which never moves, and this point is eternity. And while being one single act, prime act, endless act, its circumference is so immense that nothing can escape it. It embraces everything and everyone with one single embrace, because everything starts from that prime act, as one single act. So, the creation, the redemption and the sanctification are one single act for the divinity, and only because it is one single act, it has the power to make all acts its own, as if they were one alone. Now, one who lives in my will possesses this single act, and it is no wonder that she takes part in the pains of my passion, as though in act. In this single act she finds, as though in act, her Creator creating the creation, and forming one single act with her God, she creates together with Him, flowing as one single act in all created things, and forming the glory of creation for her Creator. Her love shines over all created things, she enjoys and takes pleasure in them, she loves them as things belonging to herself and to her God. In that single act she has a note that echoes the whole of the divine operating, and in her emphasis of love, she says, "What is yours is mine, and what is mine is yours. Be glory, honor and love to my Creator." In this single act she finds the redemption in act, she makes it all her own, she suffers my pains as if they were her own, she flows within everything I did, in my prayers, in my pains, in my words, in everything, she has a note of reparation, of compassion, of love and of substitution for my life. In this single act she finds everything, she makes everything her own, and places her requital of love everywhere. This is why the living in my will is the prodigy of prodigies, it is the enchantment of God and of all heaven, as they see the littleness of the creature flow in all the things of their Creator. Like solar ray, bound to this single act, she diffuses everywhere and in everyone. Therefore I recommend to you, even at the cost of your life, never go out of this single act of my will, that I may repeat in you, as though in act, the creation, the redemption and the sanctification. See, also nature contains the similes of this single act. In the atmosphere, the sun has one single act. From the moment it was created by God, it always does one single act. Its light, its heat, are so transfused together as to become inseparable from each other, and, from up high, it remains always in the act of sending light and heat. And while, from up high, it knows how to do but one single act, the circumference of its light which descends down below is so great as to embrace all the earth, and with its embrace it produces innumerable effects, constituting itself life and glory of all created things. By virtue of this single act, it has the virtue of enclosing each plant within itself, and to some it administers development, to some maturation of fruits, to some sweetness, to some fragrance. It can be said that the whole earth begs life from the sun, and that each plant, even the littlest blade of grass, from the sun beseeches its growth and each fruit it must produce. But the sun never changes its action, it glories in doing always one single act. The human nature also contains the simile of one single act, and this is contained in the beating of the heart. Human life begins with the heartbeat. The heartbeat does always one single act, it can do nothing but beating, however, the virtue of this heartbeat, its effects in the human life, are innumerable. As it palpitates, and at each heartbeat, it makes the blood circulate in the members, up to the outermost parts. And as it palpitates, it gives strength to the feet in order to walk, to the hands in order to work, to the mouth in order to speak, to the mind in order to think, it administers warmth and strength to the whole person. Everything depends on the heartbeat, so much so, that if the heartbeat is a little labored, one loses energy and the will to operate, the intelligence becomes dim, one is full of pains, a general ill-being. And if the heartbeat ceases, life ceases. The power of a single act repeated continuously is great, much more so for the single act of an eternal God, who has the virtue of doing everything with one single act. Therefore, neither past, nor present, nor future exist in this act, and one who lives in my will already finds herself in this single act. And just as the heart does always a heartbeat in the human nature, which constitutes itself life of it, so does my will palpitate continuously in the depth of the soul, but with one single heartbeat. And as it palpitates, it gives her beauty, sanctity, strength, love, goodness, wisdom. This heartbeat encloses heaven and earth. It is like blood circulation, like circumference of light. It can be found in the highest points and in the outermost parts. Wherever this single act, this heartbeat of the soul, has full vigor and reigns completely, there is a continuous prodigy, the prodigy which only a God can do, and therefore new heavens, new abysses of graces, surprising truths are discovered in her. But if one asks, where does so much good come from? She would answer, united with the Son, together with the human heartbeat, and with the single act of the eternal God. I do only one thing. I do always the will of God and I live in it. This is all my secret and all my fortune. Having said this, he disappeared, but later I found myself outside of myself, with little baby Jesus in my arms. He was very pale, he was shivering all over, his lips were blue, and he was cold and so emaciated as to arouse pity. It seemed to me that he had taken refuge in my arms in order to be defended. I pressed him to my heart to warm him. I took his little hands and feet in my hands, and I squeezed them so that he would not shiver. I kissed him and kissed him, over and over again. I told him that I loved him very, very much. And while I was doing this, the little baby regained color, he stopped shivering, he was all restored and he clung more tightly to me. But while I thought that he would remain always with me, to my surprise I saw that, very gently, he was going down from my knees. I cried out, pulling him by one arm, Jesus, where are you going? How can this be? You leave me? And he, I must go. And I, and when are you coming back? And Jesus, in 3 years from now, and he took his way to leave. But who can say my sorrow? I repeated to myself, among tears and convulsions, I will see him again in 3 years from now. Oh, God, how shall I go on? And the pain was so great that I fainted and could not understand anything any more. But while I was languishing, faint, I just barely opened my eyes and I saw that he had turned back and was coming up from my other knee, and, very gently, he crouched down on my lap, and he caressed me with his little hands, he kissed me, and repeated to me, calm yourself, for I do not leave you. And as he would say, I do not leave you, I would feel myself come round and life given back to me. And I found myself inside myself, but with such fear that I felt myself dying.